Welcome to the module on globalization and changing dynamics of production. In the context of globalization, the most important factor that drives in is the flow of goods and services across different nations, and thereby it becomes an important instrument in the entire dynamics of globalization. This also involves the changes in the stages of production according to different modes and different flows of capital flows which are driven by international trade. So, in this context, the backdrop of this entire dimension refers to the flow of services and data, which is playing a major role in the global economy. Not only it is driven by the trade, but also it is driven by the information. So, whenever a nation or a globe wants to be more knowledge intensive, then it is the globalization which plays an important role, which makes the flow of services to be much faster than the flow of trade, which involves the flow of information. Secondly, we say that services also constitute an important component of these global value chains, because these global value chains are basically the integral part of any sort of globalization, and these are becoming more and more knowledge as well as technology intensive. So whenever we talk about the factor of production or talk about any context on the production landscape, the most important factor that crops in is the low skill or the low cost of production. So globalization basically helps in the process of transformation, how this low skill can be transformed into medium skills, and finally it can become more and more capital and labor intensive. In this context, we bring a plethora of companies, countries, and workers who work together in the next era. So whenever we are talking about a globalized era, then it takes care of the companies and the countries and the workers who are ever participant in this dynamic process and thereby inherent within the concept of globalization. This brings into the concept of global value chains. So global value chains are undergoing 5 structural shifts which will be discussed elaborately in this module. So one of the forces is basically reshaping the global value chains in the geography of the global demand, because this brings about the time zones, this brings about the geographical climatic conditions and also the geographical territory. So accordingly, the global value chains will customize their products and make them exporting. Whenever we consider the domestic supply chains in the China and the other emerging economies, this also decreases the global trade intensity. That means the global trade intensity also gets affected because of the success of the global value chains across the globe. And new technologies are also changing the cost, because this brings in more and more technological innovations which may reduce the cost and may participate in this regard. Moreover, we say that given the shifts in the value chains, the companies need to revitalize their strategies globally. And the strategic transformation has to be done faster, and that there has to be some revitalizing in this manner. This also brings into the question on what are global value chains. So global value chains are basically undergoing the shifts. The shifts are basically dependent upon the changes in the geography of the global demand, rise in the domestic supply chains, technologies are coming in as the regard, and shifts in the value chain also comes up. So whenever we are considering any kind of reflections on the global value chains, this type of factors are taken into account. Now we move on to some of the reflections of the global value chains across the globe. So the first one comes about goods producing value chains have grown less trade intensive. So that means we want to consider those type of products among the dynamics of the changes in the factors of production which are less oriented to trade. So services create roughly 1/3 of the value that goes into the traded manufactured goods. So whenever we are talking about the service sector, then the traded manufactured goods are taken up. For example, the intermediaries or the blue chips in case of the computers, research and development, particularly in terms of the pharma industry, which talks about the copyright and the patent, engineering, definitely the mechanical and the physical equipments, sales and marketing, which refers to communications in the services, definitely comes the issue of finance and human resources. So all of them combined together enables the goods to go to the market. So this market becomes more and more elongated, market becomes more and more broader, and this invites a lot of investors across the supply chains. Moreover, when we are considering all these markets, then we are referring to the imported services. Because through the globalization, through the global value chain, most of the domestic services are getting substituted by the importing services, and thereby they constitute one of the integral part of this value chain network. This takes care of the food processing, this takes care of the food chains that are existing currently, and thereby helps in the process. Moreover, the distinction between the goods and the services will continue to in the manufacturing sector, and thereby they will lead at the service business model. So in terms of the global value chain, it also calls for retail revolution, which affects the political dynamics of an economy. It also is affected by the political economic transformations, and thereby how a business model converts to a service model, and that is an inherent part of this global value chain. Now we move on to the second important concept under the same arena of making less trade intensive, which is the intangible asset. So this intangible asset are those which multinational companies send to their affiliates around the world. This is very much important today in the political economy of the entire globe. Today's political economy is undergoing a sort of a political globalization, which is largely driven by the technological change. Whenever we are talking about the flow of the global value chain, we invite foreign direct investment, which is done through different modes. One of the most important mode is setting up an affiliate in the host country, which is none other than multinational corporations. These multinational corporations may be a joint subsidiary of two countries, for example, Sony and Ericsson. So when we talk about a Sony Ericsson model, Sony is from the Japan and Ericsson from the Sweden. Both of them are collaborating together and thereby expanding or integrating across the globe. And this basically brings out inclusion of software branding, design, operational processes, and other intellectual property which are developed at the headquarters, but they are spreading across the globe. So this is an example of an intangible asset which is basically spreading through information, through the flow of services, and thereby affecting the political dynamics across the entire continent or across different nations. So this has a tremendous value addition over time because it goes for upgradation, it goes for the changes in the configurations, and thereby changes in the algorithms basically make the intellectual property rights to be more dynamic. This is inherent with the political setup, with the economic setup, and eventually the demographics also cooperate or adapt to these new changes. So this is one of the most important reward or can be the consequence of a successful global value chain in the telecom sector. Similarly, we can take the help of pharmaceuticals. In pharmaceuticals, we take the names of Ranbaxy, Cipla, and many other pharmaceutical units which have been spreading its copyrights and patents across the corners of the globe. And this is being done through the purchase of the proprietorship and thereby spreading. So this takes care of design and branding, which enable the companies to charge a premium for their products and thereby affecting the changes in the dynamics of value chain. So whenever globalization is penetrating into the changes or the dynamics of the production basket or the production structure, these are some of the examples which come in place. Finally, we talk about the trade statistics. The trade statistics do not make a proper representation of data in terms of this intangible asset. And thereby the trade data may not reflect that yes, there has been flow of services, there has been transmission of software through intangible asset, but the trade statistics cannot quantify. And as a result of that, they are shown to be less trade intensive. But actually this may not be. So whenever the globalization and the dynamics of the changes in production takes place, the trade statistics should try to encompass and accommodate this type of factors. This basically goes on to a concept of labor cost arbitrage. Because whatever we discuss, the most important phenomena or the factor which is inherent is the human capital, that is the human skills. So we have to be very careful and very much certain about the labor laws, about the labor security in terms of the job security, and definitely about the wage structure. So trade based on labor cost arbitrage is declining in some of the value chains. So there is a phenomenon of talent deficit that is coming up across the globe, which will not be a very, very important factor to stimulate on the global value chains. So as we've seen that with 1990s, where there has been entry of private capital, and moreover IT revolution in the year 2000, many decisions have been taken to locate production based on the labor cost. India is an example, because with the entry of the IT revolution in 2000, India had been taken up as a country where we have low cost English speaking professionals who are its surplus. And thereby any kind of MNC wants to capitalize on this country with the help of lower cost of production. Yet we see that 18% of the goods trade is a labor cost arbitrage, because this type of countries wants to specialize in labor intensive goods which requires more of capital as per their comparative cost. So it is said that over 80% of today's global trade is not from a low wage country to a high wage country. So that means it is said that any kind of equality among the country's regimes may not be possible if such kind of labor cost arbitrage takes up. So what is that? It means that the flow of the capital is restricted from the low income to high income. Rather, low wage factored into company decisions is based on the access to skilled labor, natural resources, proximity to consumers, and quality of infrastructure, because these are the major factors which are playing an important role, and they also affect in this regard. So we can say that the quality of infrastructure is very important for making the labor cost arbitrage to come up, because whenever the infrastructure will be world class or sound enough, then the distribution chains will be prompt, they will be efficient, there will not be delay in the production chains, and eventually the cost of production will be mitigated. This brings in the concept of a knowledge economy, because across the globe there had been a kind of an attempt which has already started since 2000, and at present it is taken up as the most important agenda of sustainability development goals, that is to make a knowledge based economy or a knowledge intensive economy. So in many value chains, value creation is shifting to upstream, such as research and development and designing. So the arena of research, the arena of strategies to promote research would come up in a bigger shape. As a result, the designing also should take up a pivotal role, and to downstream activities like distribution, marketing, and after sales. Because when I talk about distribution, when I talk about marketing, these are all referring to the infrastructure issues, governance issues. Definitely the political landscape or the canvas is very, very important role it plays. Because any kind of political dynamics, changes in the local government or changes in the governmental tenure affected by the ministerial decisions will also affect this distribution or the downstream issues. Because research and development may be the outcome at the central level, but in order to reap the benefits or make the benefits to be reaped by all the masses, we need proper marketing and distribution avenues. So share of the value generated by the actual production is declining. This is very much important, because when we are talking about any kind of offshore activities, like in terms of intangible asset, then that software has to be mitigated with the local government or with the host country government in terms of different protocols. And most of the protocols are dealt with the political economic setup. So the trend is pronounced in the pharmaceuticals and the consumer electronics. These are the two sectors where India also has been quite active, or rather proactive, in participating in the global supply chain, because this is a virtual manufacturing company which has come up. Because this virtual world is basically based on a digital world, a digital portal which has come up in many of the cases. And this has been focusing on developing goods and mainly the concept of outsourcing and automation. Because these two terms are very much inherent with the forces of globalization, that is outsourcing and automation, particularly the contract manufacturers. And this has become the economy or the global model to be more knowledge-based or knowledge-intensive. This basically makes us, the value chains are becoming more regional and less global. This is another interesting reflection of the global value chain as inherent within the changing dynamics of today's production. Why? Because whenever we talk about any entry of MNC or whenever we talk about any global value chain, the most important component is mixing with the cultural environment of the host country. And that is where the consumer's acceptance can be gained. Here we take the example of the Nescafe and the Brew Cafe. Because when Nescafe came for the first time, it had a high elite and a cosmopolitan brand in its advertising strategies. So that was very much not with the common taste and preferences of the Indian population. On the other hand, Brew Cafe was much more successful in its initial launch because people used to habituate with its type of designing, flavors, and the way it was advertised. So the same type of story goes with Lakme and Revlon in the cosmetic industry. So these value chains are basically refiguring as companies have to compete with the major consumer markets that are now dotted worldwide. Today's consumer markets are not isolated. They are integrated to the rest of the world in terms of knowledge transfer or in terms of information transfer. And this makes them more and more regional because they capture the ethnicity, the culture and the taste and preferences, rather they want to cope up with the westernized style. So it is said that some of the emerging markets will consume two-thirds of the world's manufactured goods by 2025, particularly in the automobile industry, where we talk about assembling, building products, which we talk about the real estate, and also the machinery. So it is said within the political landscape, within the political canvas, that developing countries are projected to account more than half of the global consumption. And that is how the participation in the global flows of trade takes place. So when I talk about the global flows of trade, it refers to services, it refers to finance, it refers to human, that is the people, the demography, and definitely it refers to the data. Because this data is talking about the big data which is related to trade statistics and the other counterparts. This brings us to the question regarding what are the reflections of global value chains. So the global value chains are reflected in making it to be less trade intensive. It's not that only by the movement of international trade, the value chains will be becoming more and more pronounced. It is becoming more and more regional in terms of ethnicity and the concern of the consumers. Trade based on labor cost arbitrage is declining in some value chains because it is seen that the low-skilled workers are being targeted more. Global value chains are becoming more and more knowledge intensive. This is very much needed because in order to cope up with the dynamism, a knowledge-based economy needs to come up. Value chains are becoming more regional and less global. This is also important because value chains are basically coming up within the taste and preferences of the consumer's demand. This basically refers to another dimension of the global value chain, that is the risk factors. It's not that global value chains will be bringing rewards to entire globe all the time, because there are some points where the policymakers needs to be cautious before jumping into or participating into a global value chain largely driven by the forces of globalization. So now we shall elaborate on the risk factors one by one. The first risk factor is referring to where to compete along the value chain. This is very much important from the trade-intensive commodities which are produced by the nation. So whenever we are talking about the business leaders, whenever they're evaluating the value, then they're changing in the industry. Some have narrowed their focus on R&D and the distribution. Some have outsourced the production. So wherever there is a cost advantage, the country should opt in for. It's not that it should be carried away or blindly imitate any developed economy or emerging economy. It has to be done on a case-to-case basis. Secondly, many of the consumers take a hyper-local approach with customized product portfolios for individual markets. So it is seen that The demand for the yellow jewelry in terms of India in the global trade is falling. And now there is a trend of customized jewelry in terms of platinum and others. So this makes it very clear that consumers' demand in the world market has to be customized. Indian jewelry market has to make its more opt or more provision for platinum or customized jewelry by giving away the traditional yellow jewelry. So network companies, that is very much important in the field of business and communications, which are highly knowledge intensive, they should also be careful in dispersing their models. So they should not try to experiment in any country when majority of the regions of the country are having the or struggling with electrification. Because electrification is a major necessity for broadband connectivity or any kind of digital outreach. So regardless of this strategy, the key point is to maintain control, trust and collaborations among all parts of the trust chains. This is very much important because whenever we are defining the value chain, we are also defining the word trust chain here because it is the collaboration control which can come up with a good governance or a political economic setup. So it means that majority of the activities can be done in-house, which will also generate employment, or the job creating sectors will also function more, and outsource with greater visibility in lower tiers of supply chain. So this is how the combined effect will take place. So this combined effect will make the model to flourish further. Secondly, we want to capture another important risk factor, how to capture the value from the services. This requires a quantification model. Because there are more value coming from manufacturing at one point of time or more value coming from the services. So shifting to services can offer advantages because here we can talk about cyclical sales. Because sometimes we say that the service sector is basically leading to real estate and construction, business and communications, which will make it more and more smoothing effect. Secondly, higher margin revenue streams can also come up. New designing models can come up which will be closer to interaction with the customers. So what we are observing, the entire business models are shifting to delivering services. Companies need to develop on data and analytics. That is what the artificial intelligence model brings in. Right subscription is needed and performance-based activities must come up. Because if these are not coming up complementarity, then any kind of jumping into global value chain will not be of no use. Definitely the operational footprint need to be reconsidered. This refers to new automation technologies. So the country must adopt it to them. Factor cost also should come on. The importance of the speed to market are driving. So as a result, localization is important everywhere. So whenever the localized market is sound enough in terms of all these external factors, then it can be a successful participation in the global value chain. As a result, the production must be near the consumer markets, end-to-end location decisions must be taken, and then only the dynamics can take a proper shape. Moreover, be flexible and resilient. Flexible means open to new ideas. Resilient means shock absorber. That means the nation must be able to cope up with any kind of shocks which can penetrate through the globalization or through the transmission channels. So companies can have a complex set of unknowns, that is called random factors, uncertainties. So any kind of policy decision will come up which can be strong or resilient enough. Tax codes are being reconsidered for the digital and the intangible era. Building of agile operations should come up. Versatile common platforms are important, and everywhere it calls for a proper flexibility. So this flexibility can be done through the pricing policy, mitigating the price, long-term contracting, shaping the consumer demand. That is very important because consumers will be generating the demand in the world market and thereby participating in the supply chains. Definitely prioritizing the speed to market and proximity to customers. This is also important because there should be more and more consumer behavior in this case. Analysis should be done to proper market research that will enable the model to be flourish or to be successful. And as the same time, there should be proper provision for postponement. That means creating a large standardized product at a distance and finishing it in time whenever it is needed. So some kind of plan B models need to be set up when it is required across the globe. Moreover, closer supplier relationships. This is very important for a successful retail revolution. So when we talk about a retail revolution, there should be some kind of issues on risk and cost, some kind of genuine collaboration between the customer status and the benefit that comes up, some kind of re-evaluation need to be done, large firms should come up in the process, logistics production should take up a bigger role, and moreover, companies should take up a pivotal role in this regard. That is our closer supplier relationship we'll be working on. So the question opens up, what are the risks associated with the global supply chains? So the risks can be reassessing with the value chains, capturing the value from the services rather than from manufacturing, operational footprint should be upgraded, proximity to consumers must be taken as a major priority because they are the major takers, and closer supplier relationships should be built on. So this brings in the role of FDI because FDI plays a very important role in order to make a global company and thereby make it a proper timing. The role of FDI also takes place from the cheaper sources. Managerial and technical resources are taken up. FDI also brings in the skill formation, boosts efficiency and stimulates growth potentials. Transnationality is also an important word in the context of the global supply chain because it brings a dependence across the state level, the TNCs, that is the transnational corporations, and also the link with the companies. So that is how we say that there should be more localized factors and also in tune with the global factors. This also brings in how a transnational corporation will work, how the asset will be distributed, and how it will gain success in both qualitative and quantitative changes, which is a result of technology. Hence, new forms of specialization, new forms of planetary economic development and policy changes are required, and thereby they can contribute more to the value chain management. Further, we take up a question on what is meant by transnationalization. It means how the control over the assets in one country can be involved and how it can spread across the various dynamics of globalization. So this brings up to the summing up of this module, which takes care of the global value chain and its definitions and reflections. In this regard, what can be the concept of transnationalization, how FDI can come up in this regard, and what can be the forces of globalization. Thereby we can say global value chain can act as a stimulating factor if it is supported by more localized effect so that to reap the benefits in the global landscape.